Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to The Proof That Islam is the Truth, where we are talking about the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon him. We talked about how Islam is going to be the dominant religion. Indeed, it is becoming that. It is that. And we mentioned about how Islam until today is growing, and that how the Qur'an was promising the Muslims victory even though they were so small and they were so weak. Also, there is another prophecy in the Qur'an, in the 30th chapter of the Qur'an, in the verses 1 to 7, a very interesting prophecy. The Roman Empire has been defeated in a land close by. This is what the Qur'an is saying. But they, even after this defeat, will gain victory in a few years. Allah's is the command in the past and in the future. On that day shall the believers rejoice with the help of Allah. He helps whom He wills. Allah is the mighty and the most merciful. It is the promise of Allah. Allah never breaks His promise, but most men do not understand. They crave for the outer things of this life, but of the hereafter they are heedless. Now, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, had for many years been fighting the Persian Empire, and they suffered a massive defeat at the hands of the Persians, who captured Jerusalem in the year 614 of the Christian era. And after that, Egypt fell, and then Syria fell. And Constantinople itself was laid siege to. This means a land close by. Now, the pagan Arabs actually delighted in this, as it seemed to signal to them the success of idolatry and its followers over the people who followed the revelation of Ahlul Kitab, the Christians in this case. And when this verse was revealed, it seemed impossible that the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, would ever recover. It seemed it was the end. The Persians had reached dominance. The Byzantines, it seemed, were finished. Now, the word in the Qur'an, translated a few, is bidah, which actually means anything from 3 to 9 years. That term means anything from 3 to 9 years. And Ubay, we mentioned him in a previous talk. Ubay, who was a pagan Arab, he actually betted Abu Bakr, who was a close companion and a friend of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He betted Abu Bakr that this will never happen. This will never happen, he said. I'll take a bet. Now, this is before gambling was forbidden. Of course, gambling is not allowed, and that was forbidden later. And so they actually took a bet of 100 camels. That's about 150,000 pounds in modern day money. That's quite a lot of money. 100 camels is a lot. And they wagered that this will never happen. Now, it actually did happen. By the year 623, Heraclius, the Byzantine Empire, took to the field and vanquished the Persians in a series of battles, culminating in the Battle of Nivev. And this was in 627. By this time, in fact, Ubay had been killed, so his relatives actually had to pay the debt to Abu Bakr. And at this time, when the Romans won, the Muslims had been victorious over the Quraysh and were rejoicing just as the Qur'an had prophesied. The prophecy came true exactly. And it is a great reminder that Allah knows and you don't know, and little do men understand. And it is the same Qur'an that is warning us about the dangers of disbelieving in Allah and His messengers and not following His revelation. It is the same Qur'an that warns us of the hellfire and invites us to the paradise, and warns us of the distress and the misery that people will suffer on the Day of Judgment for not following the truth. Anyway, we've got some more prophecies for you coming up. So let's mention, these are some prophecies from the hadith, or the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there is a long narration that is found in the two authoritative books of hadith. This means Bukhari and Muslim. We've mentioned Sahih al-Bukhari before. Sahih Muslim, we also mentioned it previously, in fact. These are considered to be the most two authentic sources of information, textual information, in the religion of Islam after the Qur'an. Now, according to this long hadith, the Prophet Muhammad was sitting in a garden, and Uthman ibn Affan walked in And the Prophet asked Abu Musa Ash'ari, who was with him, to inform him of the good news of paradise. So to tell Uthman of the good news of paradise. And also that people would mutiny against him. And this exactly is what happened. It is well known from Islamic history that the people did mutiny against Uthman ibn Affan. In fact, they even killed him. Prophecy came true exactly as the Prophet had said. In another narration, while the Muslims were fighting the Jews in Khaybar, after some days of attempting to besiege the fortress, the Prophet said the next day he would entrust the flag to a man whom Allah would give victory. And he gave the flag to Ali, and the same day the fortress was conquered by the Muslim under Ali's command, as the Prophet Muhammad had prophesied. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, the caliphate will last for 40 years. Then there will be a biting kingship. So the caliphate will last for 40 years. The caliphate are the righteous successors of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And then after that, there will be a biting kingship. So the Prophet said 30 years. And it happened exactly like this. The rule of the rightly guided khulafa, meaning Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, was exactly 30 years. Okay? So we had Abu Bakr for 2, Umar for 10, Uthman for 12, Ali for 2.5, and Hassan, who succeeded Ali ibn Talib, was 3.5 years. So that makes, as the Prophet ﷺ said, exactly 30 years. After that, evil spread and kingship was established, just as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said would happen. In another hadith, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he predicted the capture of Egypt. Remember, this is a time when the Muslims, they're just a small group of people. Yet he's telling them, you're going to capture Egypt. And he even said and told them, treat the people well. And he mentioned also that they would seize the treasures of the Persian emperor. Can you imagine this? He is telling them, you will defeat the Persians. You will seize the treasures of the Persian emperor. And he described the palace. And all of these things happened as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said. He even mentioned concerning one particular companion, Suraqah ibn Malik, that you will wear the bracelets of the Persian emperor. And in fact, this is exactly what happened. The bracelets fell into the possession of Umar ibn al-Khattab. He called Suraqah, who was still alive. Of course, he could have been killed in all of these wars, but he was alive. And Umar put the bracelets on him and reminded him of what the Prophet ﷺ had said. Also, in Sahih al-Bukhari, Auf ibn Malik, he reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, look for 6 incidents before the last day. First, my death. Then, and this is of course true, the Prophet died. Then the conquest of Jerusalem, and the Muslims conquered Jerusalem. Third, an epidemic among them. Fourth, the abundance of wealth, so a man would not gladly accept 100 dinars if given it. Fifth, a trouble that would involve all Arab families without exception. Sixth, a treaty with the Christians, which the Christians would violate. So the hadith describes exactly what happened. Jerusalem was captured, and after this, in 16 years after the hijrah of the Prophet, an epidemic broke out. It's well known about, and 70,000 people died. Wealth became plentiful after that, especially during the caliphate of Uthman, and after that in the time of Umar ibn Abdulaziz, as is so famous. When the collectors of zakah, they found no one who was poor enough to receive the zakah. There was no one poor enough to receive zakah money. That's how wealthy the Muslims had become. And that's the prosperity Islam brought to the world at the time. And this is exactly what happened. Also, after the rebellious war against Uthman, things became worse after his murder. And it is true that none of the Arab families were saved from the fitna of that, from the trials and the tribulations. After the murder of Uthman, there was not one family that except was involved in it, just as the Prophet ﷺ had said. In another narration, the Prophet said that the Muslims would conquer Rome and Constantinople. And the Prophet was asked which was first, and he said the city of Heraclius, which of course means Constantinople. And that is absolutely true. Of course, Rome has never been taken by the Muslims, and then I suppose this is something we'll have to say that every Muslim will believe this is still something that is due to happen sometime in the future. Okay, but Constantinople certainly was conquered by the Muslims. Okay, and what is noteworthy here is that these predictions were made at a time again when the Prophet, no one could imagine that the Muslims were going to do such things. Okay, the Prophet also, in many, I'm just saying very quickly some prophecies here. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam also predicted that the Muslims would divide into many different sects and different groups. And in some hadith, he described the characteristics of these sects and these groups that would arise. He mentioned that some of them would do to Ali what the Christians did to Jesus. In other words, they would claim that Ali is God. How can a Muslim ever claim that a human being is God? This is the greatest type of disbelief you can imagine, to claim that a human being is equal with Allah. The Prophet said some Muslims will do this with Ali, and they did. First of all, a sect arose exaggerating and in their love for Ali ibn Talib. And then this same sect, subsects of them went on to even claim that Ali is Allah, is equal with God. And this group, by the way, still exists until today. Also, he mentioned that some people would deny the qadr, or the divine decree of Allah, and he called them the Majus of this ummah, the Magians of this ummah. And this has happened exactly, they were called the Qadriyah, a group of people who denied the divine decree, which is an essential part of Islamic belief. And he also mentioned that a group would arrive from a certain tribe, and the Prophet pointed out this individual, and they would say that the people who are believers are unbelievers. They would apply the verses of the Qur'an talking about unbelievers to the believers. And the Prophet mentioned very bad things about them, and said, in fact, he called them the dogs of the hellfire, because they are saying that the true believers are in fact disbelievers. And the Prophet mentioned and pointed out this man. And it happened that a group arose called the Khawarij. These Khawarij, actually most of them were exactly from the tribe this man, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, pointed out. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that they should be fought against, and this is exactly what Ali ibn Talib did. He fought against this group, the Khawarij. So these are some of the hadiths of the prophecies of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we have a lot more, in fact, to come. We're going to be mentioning some of the signs of the Day of Judgment, things that the Prophet Muhammad said would happen before the last days. And that will be our last in the episode of the proof that Islam is the truth. So make sure you tune in and listen into that for our last and final episode of the proof that Islam is the truth. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.